What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today we're going to be discussing Wabi Sabi street photography and what that means and how you can apply it to your street photography. And so here we have on the cover of this slideshow a photograph of a Japanese weeping tree. And actually I work in horticulture and tend these trees very often outside in the garden, and I find it to be very meditative to spend time around these trees and to embrace the imperfection and the beauty that lies within nature itself, where nature is always in flux and always changing. Throughout the change of seasons, you get to witness the way in which the leaves wither and decay and the way the trees grow and bloom again. And I find this to be the ethos of Wabi Sabi street photography, is embracing the impermanent nature of life. And so what is Wabi Sabi? Wabi Sabi comes from Japanese philosophy. Wabi meaning simplicity, humility, and connection to nature. Sabi meaning the beauty of aging, wear, and impermanence. And so together it's about finding beauty in the imperfect, the impermanent, and the incomplete. Wabi Sabi teaches us that nothing lasts, nothing is finished, and nothing is perfect. You know, humans, we too are imperfect creatures. We're flesh, we're bound by gravity, we cut, we bleed, we feel sorrow and greed, we lust for the flesh of others. We too are these imperfect creatures, similar to the way that nature is imperfect, but that imperfection is perfection. And that's, to me, the beauty of Wabi Sabi street photography. And so here we have two images that I made of peace lilies, one as it's starting to bloom and one fully bloomed. And so I believe that essentially everything is in flux, everything is changing, everything around you is impermanent. And so embracing that through the core philosophy of this Japanese approach to photography, I believe that we can go out there and make interesting and compelling images. And so embracing imperfection and the transient nature of things, once again, is at the core of Wabi Sabi. And so as these birds are in flight here at Penn's Landing in Philadelphia over the Delaware River, I remind myself that these birds in motion and the waves that were crashing behind them are always in flux and always changing. And I find the beauty in these different moments that are fleeting and these sort of passing by moments that, you know, otherwise go unnoticed, right? And so as a photographer, the beauty is that you can go ahead and uplift these mundane moments through your photography. And I find this to be the superpower of photography, is finding meaning in the mundane. And so I believe that we should practice Wabi Sabi street photography because we already know too much about creating flawless, sharp photographs. And so I believe that Wabi Sabi, it just reminds us that perfection isn't the goal with photography, right? It's about seeing the world as it is, raw and real. You know, this to me is what street photography, it's all about, embracing the authentic and spontaneous. And so, you know, the cracks, the rust, the peeling paint, you know, all of these different details and things that are impermanent and maybe not necessarily seen as beautiful to an observer's eye can then become beautiful through the way that you uplift these moments in a photograph, recognizing once again that imperfection is perfection. And so as I passed by here in Philadelphia, in my hometown, I noticed this car on fire, and it was a very sudden event. And so I was there and I was prepared and I made a photograph. And, you know, this to me is a photograph that I believe embodies this notion of Wabi Sabi, as everything is in flux and nothing lasts forever. And so I encourage you to let go and let life flow towards you. And so what does this mean? Essentially, when I'm walking on the streets, I'm walking 75% slower than everybody else around me. You know, when you're out there and you're practicing your street photography in the vein of Wabi Sabi, one doesn't really need to seek or hunt for anything. You know, for me, Wabi Sabi teaches me that you can find potential in photographs all around you, right? Where you simply are there and you're ready to make pictures, and you allow the waves of life and the flow of the street to sort of crash towards you, and you're there to just embrace it all. And so how to photograph Wabi Sabi. So my sort of practical, technical advice for you is to set your camera to program mode or macro mode, right? I love using macro mode. You know, I love getting close to the texture of things. Here we have a photograph I made of a leaf with some beautiful dewdrops in the morning. You know, I think it's really important for you when you're out there and you're practicing this kind of photography to stop overthinking and really just let your intuition guide you, right? Focus on the details. Look at the worn leaves, the puddles, the textures on a faded wall. Notice the human presence in things, right? The scratches on a bench or a rusted hinge. You know, there's evidence of people inside of these mundane moments that doesn't necessarily have to include a person there. And so I believe in this philosophy of living your everyday life and bringing the camera for the ride. And so once again, just letting life flow towards you, where you're living your life you have your camera with you, and you snapshot your way through life. You are no longer on the hunt for your next photo. You're no longer on the hunt for that next best photo, but you simply go out there and make new photos, if that makes sense, where I find that the best way to approach photography these days is to go forward without any preconceived notions of what you will find, right? Just simply going out there for the walk, enjoying the moment, and then you're there and you're ready to press the shutter. And so I encourage you to treat photography like a visual diary of your day, and you're just taking notes of things that you find along your journey. And so I believe that high contrast black and white is the best for this kind of photography. And so cranking the contrast to the max strips away the distractions and highlights the raw textures, as we have a photograph here of some cracked paint on the wall. And so I love using the Ricoh GR III, and I highly encourage you to use a Ricoh if you have one to make these kind of photographs. There's something about the nature in which you use the LCD screen and snapshot. The macro feature is incredible, and I believe that the macro mode, capturing these kind of details and cracks or faded things that you find along the walls, are so sublime and so beautiful. By cranking the contrast, you get a beautiful file straight out of the camera. I use the small JPEGs. I think that's all you need. Just keep it simple and raw. And so Wabi Sabi does not require you to travel. This to me is so liberating, where in the past I've been traveling the world for a decade working on my photography, going to all of these different various locations, from the slums of Mumbai, India, to the mountaintops of Mexico City, to the rural villages in Zambia, Africa, or the desert of Israel. And here we have photographs of a tattered poster that I found inside of the Wanamaker building as it was closing down recently, or a chain that's locked around a pole here, separating a newspaper stand from the sidewalk on the streets, or these different love notes that people wrote upon the text or the bark of a tree using a knife to carve in their initials, right? You don't need to go out there and to, travel anywhere within the world to make these kind of photos, but what's in your backyard, what's in your hometown, what's around the next corner, go there and photograph. And one practical suggestion is to walk down the alleyways, walk down the streets that are less traveled, where maybe people aren't actually walking down, and you'll find yourself noticing so much more. And when I go out there and I practice my street photography these days, I really slow down. What I notice is the slower you walk, the more you see. The more you see, the more you photograph. And the more you photograph, the more curious you become. And the more curious you become, the closer you become to the moment, the closer you get to the ground, the closer you get to the textures, the closer you get to the ethos of Wabi Sabi street photography being this transient nature of life, where you're existing within that moment. And through making a photograph, I believe that you recognize that. And so the beauty is in the imperfection of life. This to me is what Wabi Sabi is all about, where Wabi Sabi, it's a mindset. It trains your eye to see beauty in the flaws all around you, whether it's this newspaper stand that I photograph here with the dewdrops and the tattered poster there, faded signs, chipped paint, cracked pavement. Within the mundane lies infinite possibilities. And so I encourage you to shift your mindset and to not necessarily have any preconceived ideas of what you want to photograph. You don't need to go out there with a theme. You don't need to go out there with a project. You really don't need to go out there with any goals. And this to me is so liberating, because when I embrace the streets these days, walking at a slow pace, I really slow down and I notice so much more. And it's through recognizing the beauty in imperfection. And so I treat photography as meditation, where when I'm photographing, I'm simply being. When I'm walking, I exist outside the passage of time. Where we have a past, we have a future, but these things aren't of my concern. And when I'm with my camera, I'm in this very curious, Zen-like meditative state of recognizing all the patterns around me, whether I'm watching the light and the way it casts upon surfaces, or the people and the way that they move upon the street. All of these different ways in which you could photograph really excites me, where I'm photographing so much more than I ever have before through adopting this mindset of the Wabi Sabi. And essentially by walking at this slower pace and scanning all the details around you, you're just going to find yourself so inspired to make more photographs, where a lot of the times life may seem mundane. It might not seem like there's much going out there on the streets. But once again, through shifting your mindset and your approach to how you see the world, you will find yourself creating new worlds in the photographs you make. And so as a street photographer, we thrive on spontaneity, authenticity. And this is why Wabi Sabi fits perfectly, because it's all about finding beauty in the everyday. It's about letting go of perfection, embracing the moment, where all of the different details, all of the different imperfect little details that you find has potential to uplift in a photograph. And this, to me, just makes me smile. It just makes me so joyous to know that there's so much to do, there's so much to see, to explore, and to photograph out there in the world when you adopt this new mindset of Wabi Sabi, of embracing this sort of impermanent nature of life. And so maybe you can't live forever, but you can make a photograph. This to me is empowering, because life is short, but art is forever. And so recognize that superpower of creating photographs. So my final thoughts for you: embrace imperfection. Let go of the idea that every photo needs to be perfect. Look for beauty in the worn, the weathered, the overlooked, in those little details that people pass by, where imperfection, once again, is imperfection. And so I highly encourage you to use some of these photographs that I've showed you in the slideshow as inspiration for how you can approach the streets and create your own way of making photographs in this vein of Wabi Sabi. I think that going out there and photographing with this approach is all about slowing down. It's about noticing those details that are overlooked. It's about making photographs that are close and personal and uplift the soul of the street, or the soul of the photographer. That to me is the beauty of this sort of approach. It's very beautiful, really. I mean, finding beauty in the imperfect nature of life, it just reminds us that, nothing is perfect, nothing should be perfect. And so when you're out there and you're photographing, just let the chips fall as they may. I suggest, don't go out there with any particular route or any idea of where you want to be, but sort of just wander endlessly and find yourself embracing the moment and uplifting these different imperfect things in photographs. And so it doesn't necessarily, and again, with Wabi Sabi, I don't think it needs to be a photograph of like, something that's got like a crack, or something that's, worn and torn, as much as that is the ethos of it all. But I think the transient nature of life, right? The fleeting sunrise, the fleeting sunset, the fleeting birds, the fleeting moments, these things that we like to capture with our street photography, I believe that they become something that we can embody within the philosophy of Wabi Sabi. And so think about how you can adopt this philosophy and this approach and this mindset to transform your street photography. And so with that being said, thank you for watching today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.